Welcome back. Quick video. Pretty much just where you can put a coolant temperature sensor or temperature sending unit for like a mechanical gauge, an electric gauge, or whatever. There's a few places where Ford puts these on the factory CVH engines. So I have a factory built turbo motor here. This is a 1.9 EFI high output that someone converted to carb, and then this is just a normal 1.6 carb. And then I also have a head for a 1.9 CFI, which is also the same slash similar cylinder head for the SEFI heads. So that'd be the 91 through 90, 95 or 96, I believe, escorts. Yeah, you know, whatever the second gens are. But we'll start at the beginning here. So with 1.6, there's a few places where you can mount such a sensor. From the factory, they all come with a temperature sensor right here on the coolant. Well, this is the thermostat manifold. There's thermostat housing. This is the cast aluminum manifold that they make for it. So the thermostat is right back in here, underneath that lettering. And then on the end, they drill a hole, they tap it, and then they screw in this temperature sending unit. And then some of them will also have this with this Allen head slug on the side. That's a spot where you could potentially put another sensor. I think, yes, unless this is an air bleed, that should be a fine spot to put a sensor. And I think it is the air blade. So, can't have one there, or maybe you can, but I don't think it will be as effective. But if you put it right where the factory one is, that's perfectly fine. Well, there's one other place you could put it if you still wanted to keep your factory sensor there. On the back side, some of these heads will have this, I can't remember if it's steel or aluminum. I thought I had an aluminum one, but I'm thinking maybe they're all steel. But some have the steel coolant passage port that threads into the back corner of the head here, right by the distributor. And then it really all it does is direct coolant from that port all the way down to the hose that goes straight into the heater core. That's really all it does. You can remove that hard metal line and cap it off if your intake manifold already has a coolant line, like you see there, that has the two metal hose clamps. Does the same thing. This is just probably maybe a little bit more effective. It would get the hot coolant out of the head faster than it would, stuffing it through the intake manifold first. But keep in mind, this is only the carbureted intake manifold. I don't believe any of the other intake manifolds are like this, where the coolant shares, or the coolant travels within the manifold to keep the intake charge warm, except in the CFIs. In the CFIs, you can see that there's two coolant passages, and they go underneath the intake charge part of the intake manifold, so they can keep that intake charge kind of warm once it gets up to temp. However, you can see on the end here, it doesn't have that casting that I mentioned earlier. It doesn't have a temperature sensor put on the end here. So if you have a CFI head, then your only hope is to either mount your temp sender where it originally was on the thermostat housing. For here, it's right there, that guy. Or if you have an aluminum cast one, you could probably drill a second hole somewhere in this vicinity, tap it, and then run a sender into it. But if you have a steel one, it's not likely. These steel ones are pretty slim and slender. They have bungs welded onto them for these temp senders, so I don't think you can add on to these without doing some cutting, drilling, welding, and then leak testing, among other things. But you could just unplug the factory one and hook up your, put in a different sensor, hook up a mechanical gauge, electric gauge, whatever, to fit your needs, which is probably something you'll have to do here. But not all the engines will have that metal coolant transfer tube. Some will just have a sensor bolted onto the back corner of the head, and some will just have a plain old cap bolted there, or a cap pressed in. We're going to look over here, my turbo engine. You can see that this is one of those ones that has just the sensor bolted in its place, and it has the somewhat unique turbo thermostat housing. It also has that pressure sender there. This one I don't think you could tap and drill a hole onto. It seems to be a little bit more rounded and smaller than these guys are. These are a little bit bigger, but yeah, they're still round, so probably couldn't drill and tap into those either. But and like I said, all these engines, 80s engines, they're all hit or miss. Some of those have the metal transport tube for the coolant. Some just don't. I couldn't tell you which ones do and which ones don't. So far I've had a carbed base model that does, a carb base that doesn't. My 1.9 high output does, my 1.9 turbo does not. 1.9 CFI cannot. And there is one last option on these engines if you have the carbureted intake manifold. You have the carbureted intake manifold. Remember how I said that there was a return port for the coolant? You can see that right there. It's got those two shiny metal hose clamps with a tube that goes straight into the coolant cavity of the intake manifold. This is a 1.6, but the 1.9 isn't very different. They just put that in they just orient that nipple and the threaded hole that it's in to a different part of the underside of the intake manifold. I believe this is a 1.9 intake manifold. If you can see, but down there they just move it to a different spot. I think they have a shooting straight out the back on the 1.9, and on the 1.6 it goes straight down. But let's see, they always have more vacuum, your temperature actuated vacuum switches or vacuum valves than what they need. So you can unplug those and replace them with Coolant Temp sending units if you need. I don't think that's something you can do with any of the EFI motors. I don't believe any of the EFI intake manifolds have any coolant going through them. I know the 1.9 EFI high output doesn't. I know the 1.6 EFI doesn't, and the 1.6 turbo I don't think it does it? It would be the same as the 83 through 85 EFI, and it doesn't seem to. But you could always change that. I'll show you one here. You can always drill a hole and tamp it into where it would normally be on your EFI intake manifold. So right where that square is, you can always take your intake manifold off, drill a hole in that, tap it, put your sending unit there. Obviously not on the mating side, but that is an option. Sadly, I don't have any CFI intake manifolds personally, but I presume it's possible that you could drill a hole in the bottom of that too, tap that hole, and then put a temperature sending unit in there as well. Obviously, as long as you're drilling into the coolant passageways. And as long as you have it somewhere close to the head will be accurate. So anywhere in the coolant section of the intake manifold shouldn't be a problem. Anywhere in the thermostat housing shouldn't be a problem. It's when you have it closer to the radiator or the the intake side of the water pump. That's where your readings get a little inaccurate, because after they go through the radiator, it gets cooler right before it goes up that tube and into the water pump. So as long as it's on the back side of the head or on the distributor side of the head or the thermostat housing, you'll be getting an accurate reading. I don't believe there's any other place where you could mount a temperature sender for coolant, that is. There are some of these slugs, Allen head slugs, that are bolted around the CVH heads, but I don't believe they go to a coolant port or a coolant passage. I'll look here and I'll show you what I find. And from what I find, it may or may not go anywhere depending on your head. This one, it could go to the coolant passageway, but I cannot confirm or deny. In other heads, it may be a little different. However, in all CVHs, this part of the head will always look blank. So there will be nothing, there will be no ports leaving the head in this area. Although a little ways down, all these ports will be the same throughout all the CVHs, I believe. And then Z-Techs are same layout, a little bit different shapes for all of them. So I wouldn't recommend trying to use that. If you strip a head down to absolutely nothing, you end up pulling those out. That would be the time for you to find out by yourself. But I don't believe that does you any good. Another place for you to look, there is another threaded, right above that slug, there's a threaded stud. And I don't think that goes into any passageway. I think it's just a slug into, honestly, just, solid aluminum back here. I think that's all it does. My turbo engine, yes, that's just the place to mount an engine hoist loop. Over here, there is a threaded hole, but again, I think that's just for an engine mount. But that's pretty much all you got for options. There are some press plugs around and behind the cam pulley, but you can't put anything in those, otherwise it will chew up your belt or your cam gear will interfere with it. So that's all you have for options. I'll leave it at that. Keep in mind everything I go over, it's only for the 80s engines. I don't have any 90s motors in with me, or any 2000s motors or Z-Techs. So we'll cap the video off there. Hopefully it was of use to you, and we'll see you later.